The night waited outside the canvas with a patient hunger, all snow hiss and breath steam and the frayed hiss of ropes shifting against poles. John sat over a map that was older than any of them and newer than what the world had made of it. The parchment carried lines for roads that might as well have been veins, smudges for villages that winter had long since swallowed, rivers that wore new edges after the last thaw. He held its edges with hands that had done stranger things recently than steady old vellum, and still the map trembled because the ground beneath the table trembled when the wind struck. Davos stood beside him, a candle in one fist and an honesty that paid no mind to rank or prayer. "You can stare a hole through it," he said. "It won't bleed better routes." John raised his eyes. The candle's weak light made Davos's scars look like someone had drawn a map on the smuggler's face. All the hard places marked by old burns and soft ones by weariness. Outside the tent, someone laughed like a cough and someone else wept without sound. Men always wept the night before battle, whether they admitted it to themselves or not. Men and boys and old faiths too. "We can't meet him on ground he chooses," John said. His voice did not belong to the boy who had once begged for a place at his father's side. It did not quite belong to the man who had died either, though sometimes he heard both lives in the same breath and wondered which had been the truer. "If we do, we die. He has more men, more horses, and no mercy." "Mercy is a poor spear," Davos replied. "But he's vain. He likes the music of his own name. That's a blade we can turn in his hand." John's finger traced a path along the King's Road where it crossed the fields south of Winterfell. The land there was gentle to the eye from a distance, rolling shallow as a held breath. But it hid low dells, winter-killed hedges, clotted ground where summer bogs had frozen into ridges that bit ankles and wrenched knees. He knew the lay of it as he knew the cold weight at his breastbone, the place where a knife had ended him and another will had returned him to pay different debts. He could almost hear the boots of boys he'd run with long ago, their laughter cracking in the cold like ice. "Laid bare like a board for him to pin us to," Davos said. "Unless we're not the board," John murmured. The tent flap lifted before Davos could answer. A wind of knives poured in and Sansa stepped through it as if it owed her deference. The fur at her throat was the red of a fox's back and the snow in her hair made a crown of nameless stones. She held herself with an earned severity John could not remember in the girl he'd known, and seeing her, he felt both a pinch of pride and a shame for all the ways he had not seen sooner. "Peter Baelish has come," she said, and those words brought with them others, unsaid but crowding the air. Davos set down the candle. "He came without drums and trumpets this time?" "With a few," Sansa said. "He doesn't breathe without waiting to be heard." John stood, the map forgotten for a heartbeat. "How many?" "The Vale sent more than crows," Sansa said softly. 40 lances for every dozen we can count, and ranks behind them. Lord Yon Royce rides at their head, and the boy who calls himself Lord of the Eyrie sits at home while Peter wears his smile like a sword. John felt the ground tilt. He had learned to mistrust gifts, and still the relief touched him like wine after drought. "Why keep this from me?" She had asked him the same thing, other nights, other choices, and the anger that had lived between them moved in her eyes like a fish under ice. But she did not feed it now. "Because you would have ridden down to meet him and begged him for help," she said. "Because he would have owned you with the gift. Because I needed to own it first." Davos scratched at his beard with the candle stub, the wick guttering smoke. "And now they're here." "He was always going to make himself useful to our story," Sansa said. "He cannot stand being absent from a tale that matters. Best to let him be useful in a way that does not end with his hands around the north." "Useful," John repeated, tasting it like a word in a foreign tongue. "How?" Sansa stepped closer to the table. She reached down without asking and smoothed the creases near Winterfell's crude sketch, then traced south, the King's Road like a blade laid flat on the sheep-pale fields. "He will want to ride at the center to be seen. Don't let him. Put the Vale to the south. Make a show of it as if we worry the neck is lost, as if they mean to return to the Eyrie before winter eats their horses. Let his banners be the ones Ramsay's scouts see first and last. Let rumor say the veil is leaving. The flayed man trusts rumor when it flatters him. John looked up sharply. For a moment he saw the outlines of a thing he'd thought he could not have, a way to bend the shape of Ramsay's mind against itself. He'll give chase. He will, Sansa said. He cannot bear a slight. He will bring his dogs and his knights and that ugly swagger, and he will think himself clever for catching deserters between winter and his own pride. And then we cut him, Davos said, catching the thread with the quickness born of a life spent outrunning other men's plans. Cut him when he's running south, hit from the north behind him. Give him a taste of his own trap. John's mouth had gone dry. The map leaped at him, distances shrinking until he could see where men would run and fall. He thought of the boys he'd trained at the wall and the old men who'd stood with him in a circle of blades. The way the only thing that had saved them was thinking one thought ahead while the dead thought only of the one before. We kill him on the road, he said. Sansa's eyes held his. You save our brother if you can. He heard the lie inside himself before he could voice it. You cannot promise that, Koss said, but there was another debt in him older than death. I will try, he said, and hated how small it sounded against all the enormity of winter. Outside, someone began to sing a southern song about summer wine and a girl with a yellow braid. It was a weak joke in the mouth of winter, but it courageously tried to be more. Word of the Vale's arrival had already seeped like heat through the camp. John watched the candle throw up its little wall of light against the tense gloom, then nodded once as if that could make the choice hold. Get Royce. Get Baelish. Sansa's mouth went thin. I'll fetch Royce. I'll let Baelish fetch himself. He wanted to say I'm sorry for everything in front of Davos and the candle and the map that had seen their father's fingerprint once, perhaps, long ago. He said nothing. Sansa's nod was small and savage. She slipped back into the night, and the wind inhaled her. Davos blew out the candle. In the dark the air felt older. If a feint is to work, my lord, it must be near enough to believe and far enough to sting, Davos said. You'll need men who can run without being seen. Men who know winter hedges and river hollows. Men who don't panic when horses breathe down their collar. John pictured Tormund's fierce grin and the way wildlings moved through open country like they were part of the grass. He pictured Lyanna Mormont's sour judgment and small blunt fingers pointing where her people would go. He heard the bones creak when the giant slept. I'll take the free folk north and west through the Wolfswood, he said. We'll come down the old hunter's tracks and keep low in the folds. When Ramsay rides to cut the Vale, we'll cut him. Signals, Davos said, as if speaking to the dark itself. A horn will vanish in the storm. Flags turn to ghosts. Fire speaks clear. We won't be lighting fires, John said. Not until it's time. They gathered just before dawn in a circle of light that held off the dark by the courtesy of a dozen torches and one stubborn brazier. Yohn Royce was iron and leather and disdain, a man whose every seam declared his contempt for new arrangements. Peter Baelish wore a black cloak and a smile that was always there, even when the rest of his face was elsewhere. He looked at Sansa more than he looked at anything else. Like a man measuring a house, he wanted to steal simply by standing in it and finding the squares in the floor. John explained what he meant to do, and while he spoke, he watched them. Royce's jaw clenched only once. When John told him he would not be riding at the center but would take his knights south with banners half furled, as if uncertain of their own direction. It took that one clench only. After that he nodded with the dissatisfaction of a man who has been given a bitter herb and knows the taste is medicine. Baelish smiled and smiled. A feint, Peter said. You have been learning. I would prefer to call it honesty, John said. We will show him exactly what we mean him to see. Peter's eyes danced briefly. And you would have my knights be bait, he purred. You brought them late, Sansa said, her voice like a blade held at the precise height of a man's eyes. Now you'll use them early. Royce barked a laugh without humor. Bait is what horses are for, the old lord said. If we can pull that bastard south, we'll give you the space you ask for. But if he turns on us, we won't enjoy it. You won't be alone, Davos said. stepping into the ring of their argument as if it were the most natural thing in the world to wade into an icy stream. You keep your line loose. You pick your ground on the move. You act like you're running because you are, but you run the way a fox runs when it knows of a hole the hounds don't. When he leans too far from his fortress and shows you his belly, the north comes out from under the snow. Peter folded his hands. Very brave, he said, and the word brave in his mouth was small and cold. I'll ride with Royce and see that the veil doesn't misstep. Sansa laughed softly. You think yourself so necessary. He turned the laugh into his pocket and kept it with all the other things he collected. Jon had nothing to say to him that would not turn to smoke. Instead he looked to Royce, and when he spoke it was to the old Iron Man. If we time this wrong, you'll die, Jon said. If you hold too long, you'll die. If you run too slow, you'll die. If you run as if you have nowhere to go, he'll scent it and press harder. Royce considered that with serenity and disdain. He said. You forgot if we ride like fools we'll die. You won't, Jon said. Ride like men who do not fear dying. That often fools fear itself. Royce's eyes glinted. Good. I feared I'd be taking orders from a man who never tasted war. War tastes of ash, Davos said. You'll eat your fill by nightfall. When they broke, they did so with motions that sent ripples through the camp. Vale horses stamped and champed as bridles found them. Wildlings flattened their already flat packs and oiled their leather to keep the squeaks down. Sansa stood outside Jon's tent with her arms crossed in the cold, face lifted to whatever the sky could be made to say. He went to her not as a commander but as a brother with a habit of having failed. I won't ask you for forgiveness, he said. That's good, she said, not looking at him. What I have left is meant for fewer men than you. He accepted the blow without stepping back. When it starts, he said, you'll go with Davos. He'll keep the reserve and he'll watch the Vale without being seen. If they falter, he'll push them without their knowing it. Yes, she said. Sansa, he said. She lowered her head and looked him in the eyes. There was a horizon in them that had not been there when they'd been children, and he knew that some part of her would always be standing on it, looking at other shores. You need me to say I trust you, she said. I trust the need. I trust that if we do nothing, he wins. I trust that if we make a pretty plan, he'll find a way to smear his ugliness over it. But I trust you to try. He nodded. It was the only vow he could keep anymore. Bring him to me alive, she said then, and that was a different request entirely. If you can. If you cannot, I won't hate you for it. I'm tired of the ways hatred ties itself to me. If I can, Jon said. Ramsay Bolton was not sleeping. He did not sleep before battles. He walked the yard in Winterfell with a hound at his heel and two behind him, the dog's breath fogging like the smoke of small fires. He hummed a tune with no tune, and when a stable boy tried to slip past him with a saddle, Ramsay reached out and stroked the boy's hair with the back of his knuckles. The boy went white around the mouth. Wolkan the maester found him near the gatehouse, his arms folded against the cold, the hounds licking at their paws for the taste of the last thing they had bitten. My lord, Wolkan said, and the title slid obediently into the air. Ramsay did not look at him. He looked at the yard, which had the look of a stage when the players are late. Scouts returned, Wolkan said. They say riders from the east arrived. Errand banners. Many banners. Many is a foolish number, Ramsay said. If you say 1, there is only 1. If you say 10, I ask which 10. Many is what men say when their faces are numb and their thoughts are tired. How many is many? Wolkan swallowed. Enough to mean trouble to any man. Fewer than the winter could swallow without remembering. They camped beyond the King's Road and they look south in their sleep. Ramsay turned. Do they? His eyes were the ice in a stagnant pool, shallow and mean. It would disappoint me if they wanted to stay. A horse whickered and stamped behind him, hoofs clopping, iron on stone. Harold Karstark came forward with a gauntlet in his teeth, spitting it into his hand as he drew near. He had the look of a man who would always be somebody's second, and the knowledge of it sat on him like a yoke he had long since decided to carry rather than cast off. "The veil came," he said. "Word is they're not keen to die in the North's quarrels. They're packing again." "Look at me, Harold," Ramsay said. Harold looked, and Ramsay smiled. It was not a friendly thing. "We will let them run a little," Ramsay said. "The dogs love the chase. So do I. Send the outriders. Let them show themselves, and then let them look thin. We will ride after them and cut them in the ribs the way you cut a pig to see how well it's fattened. Jon Snow will watch, and he will think himself wise for not being the one we chase. He will be the next pig." "You want to draw him out?" Harold asked. "I want to reach inside him and turn something," Ramsay said. "Men like him, small loyalties, small hopes. The only thing that loosens their bones enough to break is seeing the ruin of their best thing."
Harold blinked.
"Which is?" Ramsay's smile widened. "That little boy with the stupid name. The one who runs like a rabbit." In the kennels the dogs set up a keening, as if called by the thought of a thing that scared smaller things. Wolken shifted his weight against the cold. "Shall I send for the banners?" the maester asked. Ramsay reached down without looking and crooked his fingers under the hound's jaw. He lifted the dog's head and looked into its wet, eager eyes. "We will make a day of it," he said. "Tell the horn to blow. Rouse them all. I think I want the world to hear when this ends." Dawn came as a rumor. The snow was not falling. It was simply in the air because the air had become itself again. The veil moved as if they had done this walk 1,000 times and their horses had learned the step where a little falter looked like fear and the recovery looked like surrender. Royce kept his line loose and untidy, the banners half-furled and fluttering in no wind, so that from a hill they would look like the tatters of a thing not even worth eating. On the rise near the winter-stripped hedgerow, Davos watched them go with a squint and took the measure of their quivering. He had done harder things in war than watch men make bait of themselves. Not many. He turned to Sansa, who sat a mule with dignity and a chill artistry he admired even as he wished she were far away from this. The mule's breath plumed. Its ears moved as if taking counsel with one another. "They're doing it well," he said. "Too well, and Ramsay will smell the game. Just well enough, and we get all the chance we paid for." Sansa nodded. She kept her eyes on the line and did not look where the King's Road turned, as if the mere act of not seeing it would keep it from becoming a road her childhood had been dragged down. "Where is Jon now?" "In the folds," Davos said. "Where he needs to be. He'll come out when the time is right and not a heartbeat before. He'll be where men don't expect him, and then he'll be where they can't forget him." "And Baelish," Davos's mouth twitched. "Riding near Royce and pretending not to. He'll want to be in any part of this that a song might stick to, but not so close any blood the song spills flies on him. Men like him have a talent for not being where trouble is when it's on the ground, and being in it up to their necks once it's turned into a tale." Sansa said nothing. The wind combed at her hair with impatient fingers. Far away, a horn sounded a long note across the white fields. It hung for a moment and then broke itself, the sound shattering like glass and glittering into nothing. Then another horn, deeper, and then a scattering of cries that were not yet screaming. Davos lifted his chin. "There he is," he said. "Here we go." Jon trod the low line of a frozen ditch up to where it cut around a knoll and peered over at the land beyond. Sound came different off snow. It lay in it and rolled back like a weight. He could hear the horses as if they were breathing into his ear. Hear the bridle jingle and the whip of flags and men cursing the cold because they had to curse something and couldn't curse the thing they'd chosen to do. Tormund squatted beside him, his beard packing frost enough to hide another man. The wildling's eyes were bright and content with danger. "Smell them?" Jon did. The scent of horse, of leather, of men who'd sweated inside furs too long and then suddenly come into cold. He could smell smoke, too, from Winterfell, carried oddly by the wind that slid from every direction at once. One crouched behind them like a hill, his breath a regular drum. He had wrapped his fur in rags because he kept tearing at himself when the frost bit, and the rags had frozen into a white shell that made him look armored in ice. Lionel Mormont stood with her small guard just below the lip of the knoll, a banner in her hand that was bigger than she was and did not so much wave as stand like a piece of sky. "Hold," John said, as if the word had weight, and men held. Below them and off to the east, the veil did its dance. Their line stretched without breaking, and where it met a thin stand of birch, it flinched and reknit itself like thread pulled by too rough a hand. Bolton outriders spilled over the shallow ridge with noisy confidence, a swallow of color across the white. Their arrows made black punctuation in the snow. The Vale's return fire was desultory, an insult to its own ability, the insult Ramsay would note as an invitation. "He's coming himself," Tormund said. "Look, the swagger." Ramsay rode with Harold Karstark at his knee. The flayed man banners thrummed with the gallop. The pale skin on them looked sicker in the daylight. Riders spread and swallowed distance, a tide of iron and red. John watched them the way a hunter watches a stag step too far into a clearing, unafraid. He could feel the urge in his men to shout, to spring up, to begin before they had begun. He did not allow himself any of that. His hands lay easy on the rim of his shield. They might have done it without the rabbit. They might have made the cut with the clean efficiency of a butcher have an apple. But Ramsay, who fed on fear more than meat, strode out ahead with a page at his back and a boy on foot, and he made the field smaller by making it personal. Rickon was taller. John knew him in the way a man knows a song he has not heard since he was a child. The boy's hair had gone wild with cold. There was a rope around his wrists that Wolken cut without looking at him. John could not hear the words Ramsay spoke, only the shape of them, the shape of the smiles. Ramsay took a knife from his belt and used it with a fencer's neatness to nick the boy's forearm. He touched the blood with his thumb and painted a line on the boy's cheek like a father blessing a child with ash. "Old tricks," Tormund said. "Hunter's tricks." John did not realize he was moving until his knee struck stone. He saw Ramsay point the boy north with the knife as if it were an arrow itself. "Run." Rickon ran. His limbs had not learned grace. He ran like a colt, all knees and fear. Ramsay watched him go for 3 heartbeats and then raised his bow. "Hold," John said. He said it as if to himself, to every part of him that wanted to break and sprint. There were 1,000 ways to die in the next few moments. Only one of them saved what could be saved. The first arrow missed. Ramsay laughed. He led the boy wrong on purpose 2 more times to break the rhythm, and the horsemen behind him roared with the kind of glee men find only when they are breaking something that cannot strike back. John lifted his hand. He did not feel like a man. He felt like the tendon holding a limb to a joint. The third arrow did not fly. The field trembled in a new way. For a moment no one moved. Then the Vale's line, which had been a rag, became a whip that cracked south and then snapped back north as if struck by an invisible hand. Royce blew his horn. It was a deep sound, the kind you feel in your ribs. At the same instant, a horn answered from the knoll. 1-1 rose, and with him rose a roar from the free folk that was not north or south or feigned or honest, but the sound of men who had known what to fear since before they could speak and now ran at it with spears. John stood into the sound. He lifted Longclaw, and it was a simple motion, the blade light as it had been in his hand at 8 years old when he'd swung at branches and been scolded for wasting steel. "Now," he said, and the north poured over the low ground and into Ramsay's back. Riders wheeled like a flock of birds suddenly meeting wind from a different country. Harold shouted and pulled his men toward the knot of banners, but the knot itself wavered. The free folk did not fight in lines. They fought in packs. They sank teeth in where plate met leather, in the places men forget to guard because no southern knight had taught them where a man from cold country might aim. John did not see the first man he killed. He was swinging and then swinging again. A rider loomed and John took him below the knee and the horse screamed and the rider fell and John stepped past him into the next thing that wanted him dead. The world narrowed until it was bright with breath and blood. He moved toward the center because some part of him remembered that when a thing of snakes yields and spreads, you step on the head and you don't take your foot off. The Vale, freed from their own pretense, struck in a clean wedge from the south now. Peter Baelish near enough to seem brave and far enough to be able to ride the story later. Royce bellowed like a winter bull. One of the Mormont men took a flayed man banner and dragged it through the slush, laughing with blood in his teeth. Ramsay did not panic. He turned. He knocked. He loosed. John saw the shaft in the air as if it had the manners to announce itself. He moved without thinking and the arrow took him in the shoulder. He fell to a knee and the world was too bright for a heartbeat, a ringing in his ear as if a bell had been rung inside his skull. Tormund dragged him up, and something hot ran down his arm inside his sleeve. Blood could be warm as love until it wasn't. "Keep moving," Tormund shouted into his face. "You look prettier with it anyway." John grinned in spite of pain. He turned toward the place where the flayed man banner dipped and rose, dipped and rose. Harold Karstark barreled at him, axe up, teeth bared. John met him above the collarbone, felt the yield and then the awful grind. Harold's eyes widened as if he'd never imagined the world could contain this particular moment. Then he toppled from his saddle and vanished under hooves. Rickon ran. He was running north because north meant home, because the world of boys is obedient to straight lines and meaning. He ran past the place where Vale horses had pretended to falter and up toward a long drift that hit a ditch. He stumbled and caught himself on his hands and went up again like a creature that did not know those were his last steps. Sansa saw him because she had refused to look away. She kicked the mule and it jumped as if surprised by its own strength. Davos swore and grabbed for her reins and missed. An arrow sang the cruel note. The sound reached Sansa before she could decide if she had heard it or invented it. The boy jerked and there was red in the white. Sansa did not cry out. Her mouth opened and closed and the sound that would have been a scream was a private thing, terrible as a prayer that never leaves the throat. She rode hard and the mule tore at the snow, and she was on her knees and then she was holding a boy who had been a wolf cub and a storm in boots and a brother and her hands were red. Davos reached them and stopped short because there are places around grief where a man will not step if he wishes to keep his soul unbroken. "Rickon," she said, and the name had too many shapes in it now. "Rickon." His eyes dragged to her. He smiled because he had always loved the shape of smiles. "SSA," he said. He died in her arms on a field where men were teaching one another how far they could be made to fall. Davos closed his eyes and opened them again so he could stand where he was standing. He watched Sansa bend her head to the boy's hair and breathe the last smell of him into herself as if she could spit it back at the world later and make it stick. "Get him away from here," she said finally, voice steady, sanity bending itself into a weapon with the ease of a habit. "No," she said, and her eyes cut to Winterfell like knives.
No.
"Leave him where he fell. He can watch us end it." Bolton lines broke in places and bunched in others. One waded into a clot of men like a man wades into rushes, swinging an uprooted trunk he had chosen for a club. His roar a lowing as lonely as the last bull on a prairie. Arrows stuck in him and shook with each motion, and he did not seem to notice until one took him under the eye. Then he dropped the club and plucked the arrow out and stared at it like a thing that had told him a riddle in a language he half understood. He lifted his foot and brought it down and the ground itself leaped. John reached the knot under the flayed man and found Ramsay there, calm as a needle. The bastard smiled like a small boy at a cruelty he would be allowed to make. John charged. A rider cut in. John cut him down. Another, and John took his hand at the wrist and saw it arc scarlet through the air, rotation gentle as a leaf. Ramsay drew back and loosed, and the arrow took a wildling in the throat who had been roaring for someone else and now roared for himself. John was closer. He could see the curve of Ramsay's lip like a crescent in winter sky. He could see the way the man's bow bent and unbent as if it were only ever doing one thing and loving the ease of that. Ramsay wheeled his horse and fled. He didn't call it that. He called it drawing the man into the place he meant to trap him. John went after him. He knew what it was. He went anyway. The world narrowed to the space between them, the place where hate could be expressed most simply. Ramsay galloped north now, toward Winterfell, and John saw why. The gates were closing slowly because the garrison had seen the turn in the field and decided to become cautious men. Ramsay meant to slide through and let the doors be his teeth. Arrows? John bellowed, and Mormont men and Stark men and Vale men who had not run aimed and made a brief storm. Ramsay ducked low and the arrows went over him. John's horse labored in the churned snow and then found purchase and leapt. They thundered together down the long approach, two lines that had once been brothers and could not be anything but enemies now. Ramsay cut right. John followed. Ramsay's horse stumbled when it found the slick of blood under the snow and slid. Ramsay rolled clear with an ease born of practice and came up with a knife in his left hand and his bow in his right, which he had not dropped. They reached the yard as the gate shuddered and stuck two hands from closing. One hit the outer gate then like the world's fist, and the wood jumped in its sockets and the men on the wall screamed because part of the wall had become a man and no wall likes that. One hit again, and something gave with a cracking like frost splitting through a forest in a sudden thaw. Ramsay saw it, weighed it, adjusted nothing. He smiled at John and loosed an arrow. John caught it on his shield almost by accident, the impact glove-like. He threw the shield aside and they closed like water brought to a boil. Ramsay had a knife and another, and the knives were quick. John had Longclaw. The sword's light smoke flashed and struck and flashed again. He had fought men who fought, men who danced, men who lunged and men who waited. He had not fought many who enjoyed it like song. "You're late," Ramsay said quietly as if they were alone. "You always were." John had no words for him. He had the memory of a boy with red hair on a rope and the sound of Sansa's breath hitching in her chest and the way the North had looked when it still believed in fathers. He pressed. Ramsay cut his cheek and John did not feel it at first, only the wet that came after and the sting. He drove in the next blow like it was the end of a sentence he'd been writing his whole life. They slammed together and went down and Ramsay tried to draw the knife across John's neck the way he had drawn it across so many other necks. John caught his wrist and felt the bones move under his grip. Ramsay's other hand came up with the knife that had been under the other knife and John turned his head and the blade kissed his ear with enough affection to make it ring. He drove his forehead into Ramsay's mouth and felt teeth give. Ramsay hissed and some part of John was pleased the sound was finally ugly in that man. Longclaw lay a hand's breadth away in the churn. John reached, fingers brushing the pommel, and Ramsay shifted to put his knee on John's wrist. John let go, moved the hand in a feint, took the wrist that held the first knife and bent it. He felt the break like a little lightning in his hand. Ramsay made a stranger's noise and the knife came free. John took it and slammed it into the join of mail and throat. He did not drive it all the way. He held it there. Boots thundered. The gate behind them broke as one made the last hit he had to make in his life. The giant stumbled with a yard of arrows sticking out of him like quills. He put his hand on the gate as if it were a friend. Men poured in on a roar that was every name they had ever given the North. The names their mothers used when they meant to comfort and the names their fathers used when they meant to harden. Sansa walked through the half-ruined gate like snow walks through air. John looked up and saw her, and part of him that was still boy enough to need something put back in place rose in him and then lay down again. He did not look away when he spoke. "Yield," he said to the man under him. "Yield and I'll spare you." Ramsay smiled with red pouring between his teeth. "Spare me?" he said, as if the word was a pet he'd once owned. "From what?" "From your own end," John said. "I won't give you what you gave the rest of us." He stood, dragging Ramsay with him, and held him there as if holding him in the world until the right eyes had seen him. "Sansa," he called into the yard, and the yard went quiet with the quiet that happens when men run out of ways to become louder. They didn't put him in the dungeons. They put him in the kennels. The dogs paced and panted, not sure which human to trust for the right permission. Sansa stood at the gate while men leaned in at the doors to see if they had become better men since the morning. The wet smell of straw and old meat and dog breath made the air itself seem to want to crawl back into a mouth. Ramsay sat against a post with his hands tied. His smile had gone. It would come back. Smiles like his were not honest enough to go when the face wanted them to. He watched Sansa with a calm that would have looked like bravery in another man. "You won," he said, mouth complicated by its own hurt. "Does it feel like anything?" Sansa moved into the kennel and the dogs went still. She knelt and looked at him the way a judge looks at a law to see if it is broken or simply written badly. "It feels like less of something," she said. "Less of you." "Nothing leaves you, my lady," Ramsay said softly. "It sits. It rots. It breeds new things that look like other things. Did you think you could cut me out?" She smiled then in a way that made Wolken, watching from the door, cross himself with a faith he didn't have. "I thought I could watch you end," she said. "The law?" John said from the door, and the word meant something still, in his voice, even after all it had lost. "We do this by the law." Ramsay laughed, and the laugh came shallow because of the hurt in him. "Your law?" he asked. "Whose law is that today? The one the dead king wrote? The one the girl queen on an island sings to her dragons? The law of the knife? The law carved in the root of your heart that says if you don't end me the way I began you, you haven't really won?" "Silence," Davos said, which was not the law and also was. Sansa looked at Jon. The dogs had begun to whine with impatience, following breath with their eyes. She could have done it the way he had asked, standing aside and putting it to the lords and their sense of order. But order had sat in Ramsay's chair and eaten with Ramsay's fingers in this place. She wondered if there could be any law here that did not touch his grin. "We will hang you," she said. "That is the law that lived here before you, and it will live here after. Not today. Today you will sit with the smell of yourself and think on the ways you told yourself you were different. Tomorrow you'll hang from the old beam and you'll look down at the dogs. And for once something will be looking at you that doesn't need from you." Ramsay's eyes changed, small as the change was. "You think that will make you clean?" "I think it will make the floor less dirty," Sansa said. She rose and looked down at him. "You killed my brother. I'll mourn him when I have time to be whole. For now I'll settle for you becoming finally small." Outside, the yard was unsteady with victory. Men had begun the practical business of being alive in a place where others had recently died. They pulled arrows from bodies, from posts, from soft earth. They counted dead and tried to make the number mean something. One lay in the yard with his giant head tilted, one eye a blind pearl, the other open to a sky that finally seemed big enough to contain him. Wildlings sat on his shoulder and told one another how he had done things no one should be able to do. Jon stood by the old weirwood and looked at the red leaves and at the wet on the bark that had been sap or blood, depending on which story one chose. The heart tree kept its counsel, as was its way, and the ravens in the branches watched him as if he were an odd weather system passing over them. Lyanna Mormont came and stood at his elbow and did not come all the way into his thoughts, respecting that distance with a courtesy most men twice her age did not possess. "We did it," she said, with no joy and no false sorrow. "We did something," Jon said. "The North is not good with gratitude," she said. "We have long winters and short harvests. We measure differently, but I am not the North. I am Lyanna Mormont, and my measurements are my own." She lifted her chin and looked at him with a judgment that was oddly kind. "You are my king now." He looked down at her, the small blade and furs, and wanted to tell her he was not a king, that he had been a brother, a corpse, a mistake, that his blood was not the right color for the songs men had grown up on. He said none of it. He nodded as if she had put a fur around his shoulders that was warm but heavy. Davos joined them with a careful neutrality. He had been fragile all morning in a quiet, contained way, as if holding an egg inside himself and terrified of breaking it. "We found something," he said, and pulled from his coat a thing small and ugly and dear. It was the carved stag he had given a girl in a colder camp. The wood had cracked down one leg. "I'll ask the queen about it when the time is not wrong." Jon put his hand on Davos's shoulder. It was not a promise or a warning. It was something that men do when they have nothing adequate to say to the ways the world has chosen to be wrong. Davos closed his eyes for a breath and then opened them again, and he was the sort of man who always opened them, even after seeing what waited there. From the wall, a shout. It was not the shout of danger for today. It was the sound of men discovering what relief feels like in their throats. Sansa had walked up onto the battlements and the lords had turned toward her without telling their feet to do it. She looked down at them, her hair torn by the wind and the blood on her hands drying into something that would crack and flake later. And when she spoke, her voice held the yard the way a good dish holds stew. "You have done this thing," she said. "You did it for yourselves, for your dead, for your children. You did it for your names and for names that will be new in this place. The North remembers. The North has not forgotten how." Men made sounds then that were neither loyal nor disloyal. They were human. Royce stood like an oak with armor on it. Baelish smiled a private smile and moved to where the shadow of the tower fell as if shade could be a cloak. The shout that followed was not planned. Men tried a name and then another. They tried their own names on their tongues and found them less loud than one they had begun to mean. Came not like thunder but like the settling of snow after someone has disturbed it. "Jon Snow," they said, and no one corrected them because the word that came after made it a new thing. "King." He did not raise his hand. He did not bow. He simply stood and let them pour into him. He felt the place at his chest where he had been opened, and he wondered if the cold that lived there would freeze this too, make it something else. He let his eyes seek Sansa and found her watching him, her mouth not smiling but open in some new way. She gave him a single nod as if she had moved a piece from one side of a board to another and the game had become simpler by virtue of becoming harder. That night, the fires in the winter town were the fires of men who meant them. Women who had hidden inside days brought out pans and used them again. Boys who were already men after this morning bragged with the righteous clumsiness of people needing to knit their stories into something that would hold. Men from the Vale ate at northern tables and were given sour beer and meat that tasted like work. Jon walked the yard until his legs knew the new shape of it again. He stopped at the place where one lay and looked down at the giant's face. Tormund was there, sitting with his back to the giant's cheek as if to keep the night from learning the wrong lesson about how it could press on men. "He was good," Tormund said without looking. "He didn't ask your gods for nothing and he still did good." "He did," Jon said. "You could put his bones in the wall," Tormund said, meaning the shield hall that had once been his chieftain's dream and now was a memory of a memory. "Or you could burn him and send him up to the cold place the dead go when they're too big for the ground." Jon nodded. "We'll burn him," he said. The sky above them coldly approved. Sansa found him near the wolves' kennels just before midnight. The dogs were asleep, having made peace at last with the world's indecency. She looked smaller in the dark, the way all people become truer shapes at the end of a day during which they pretended to be larger. "He dies tomorrow," she said. "Yes," Jon said. "He isn't as important as I thought he was," she said. "No," Jon said. He looked at her face. The wind had worried new lines into it. They suited her in the way scars suit a hand that learned something while being broken. "I'm sorry," he said then, and this time it was for the thing that would always starve if he didn't feed it once in a while. "For Rickon. For everything we could not keep." Sansa's mouth trembled and then steadied itself. "We were children," she said. "We're not now. We make new things to keep." She looked up at the wall and beyond it, toward whatever the world meant to throw at them next. "Do you still dream cold?" she asked softly. "Always," Jon said. "Good," she said, and the word was bleak and beautiful. "Then maybe you'll be ready when the cold stops being a dream." In the morning, they hanged Ramsay Bolton from the beam that had held better men once and would hold worse if S. Omion led it. He said nothing. He did not beg because men like him do not know how. He looked down at the dogs and he looked at the people and he looked at the sky and found no purchase. Sansa did not watch his feet kick. She watched his face and waited until it made the shape she had known at last. None. The body swung and the world made a small wind around it that sounded like a relieved breath. Wolkan wrote the name on a piece of parchment in his soft hand and put it in a book where once there had been too many blank pages and lately there had been too few. Baelish came to Jon later and made a compliment out of the weather. Royce asked for orders as if nothing had happened, as men who serve and are served will always do. Jon sat beneath the heart tree with Davos and Tormund and Lyanna and Sansa and the others, and they spread a map again. The map did not care that the names on it belonged now to men who would answer differently when asked. He cared about rivers and roads and the way distance sometimes looks like invitation when winter is counting your steps. "We have the north," Lioness said, which was not entirely true and entirely true enough. "We have to hold it," Davos said. Tormund blew into his hands and rubbed them together with the practical anger of a man trying to improve a thing with friction. "Hold it against what? The wind? I've learned something about wind. It doesn't listen." Jon traced north past Long Lake and the shivering forest, because the world beyond the map had grown teeth a long time ago and was now learning to bite larger mouthfuls. He was not a lord in that moment. He was something else. A man with a sense of where the next trouble would come from and a duty to put himself in the middle of it. "We fainted south," he said, and the smile he made was small and hollow. "We crushed a man who thought the world was him. Good. We will do it again and again until we run out of men who think the world is them. But beyond them is something that doesn't think at all." Sansa's hand moved, almost touching his and then stopping a breath away as if the air between their fingers had become meaningful. "We'll need all of them," she said. "The Vale?" Davos asked. "Everyone," Sansa said. "The Riverlands, the Ironborn, if someone can tell them a story they'd rather hear than the one they tell themselves. The broken men who don't know their names and the ones who never forgot. We will need to be bigger than all of our houses and smaller than any pride." Jon nodded. "Then we begin." The halls of Winterfell filled with work again. The gates breathed in and out with the daily life of men whose hands could mend as well as unmake. The kennels took on a new smell of clean straw. The heart tree stood red and white and bemused. The snow said nothing and kept saying it as the days went on. Across the yard, someone had carved on the beam from which Ramsay had swung. Not words, just a line where a line had been and might be again if men were not careful. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. When the first raven came from the south with its message tight to its leg like a secret that wanted desperately to be told, Jon took it in his hand and fed the bird while he unwound the twine. The parchment was thin and the words on it stout. He passed it to Sansa because some things one does together even if the world had not meant to allow it. The queen beyond the sea had made land and meant to make more out of land. She spoke of oaths as if they were planks one could walk. She spoke of dragons without embarrassment. She spoke of winter as if it were a season that would listen to grammar. Jon read and then looked at Sansa and then handed the paper to Davos. "Another war," Davos said, and made it sound as harmless as a state of weather. "Best to finish ours before we try theirs." "No," Jon said. "Best to remember they are the same." Across the yard, the men from the Vale drilled with northern men and discovered in the little embarrassments of practice the way one kind of pride can make room for another. Royce cleaned his armor himself with an air of impatience, and Peter Baelish smiled at a future no one else could see clearly because he had built it with cloudy glass. At night, when the wind rose and made voices at the eaves, Jon stood on the battlements and looked north. His shoulder ached where Ramsay's arrow had found him. His cheek burned, reminding him he was part animal. Sansa stood sometimes beside him and sometimes behind him and sometimes not at all, and in each of those places he could feel the way she occupied the castle now as if it had finally made room for her. "Was it you or me?" he asked once under his breath, meaning the plan, the feint, the trap, the boy saved or not saved, the way the day had shifted the shape of them. Was it luck or will? The wind didn't answer. It was too busy being itself. The snow drifted against the merlins. He remembered the field and the way the Vale men had ridden like men who loved the illusion of fear and then remembered they loved fear's opposite more. He remembered Ramsay's face when breath left him. He remembered Rickon's last syllable. He would always remember it. He tightened his cloak and lifted his chin to the cold and let it take what it could. "We will do it again," he said aloud to the empty rampart. "We will cut where the enemy thinks we are moving away. We'll be honest about what we mean them to see." He did not know then what shape the next feint would take, or whether it would be the last one they would be allowed before the world settled finally into its winter. He knew only that this time the trap had been his. Not a pretty plan, not a trick that made him proud, only a solution in the language winter speaks. He knew that he would pay for it, as all men pay for their victories in time. Behind him, the castle breathed. Men told stories in low voices. Women measured flower and future. A girl with a face too old for her why. Ears sharpened a dagger under the cover of her quilt. An old man counted candles and hoped. The north pulled its blanket up over itself. In the kennel, the dogs slept through. They had eaten too much of the day and had no space left for the night. In the yard, someone had planted a small stake with a scrap of cloth tied to it. Snow stiffened, that had once been a boy's scarf. It was touching towards and away in the wind. Sansa, passing by with her cloak tight and her eyes on nothing a person could point to, reached out without stopping and set the scarf still for a heartbeat. Then the wind took it again and she let it. It was not hers to keep anything still now. It was hers to teach stillness where she could and movement where she must. Jon slept later that night and dreamed of the King's Road, of riders making a show of fear, of the moment a line becomes a blade. He woke with the knowledge still in his mouth like iron. He rose and dressed and went out to the yard, and the sun came up without asking anyone whether the world was ready. They trained until their arms shook and their breath made fog enough to hide in. They planned until their plans made only the kind of sense life allows. They buried their dead. They burned their giant, and the fire shone up into a sky that had never seen such a thing up close. The ashes of one rose and drifted and made a mistake of light on the air. Some men took it for a sign and felt larger for it. Jon took it for what it was and felt only honest. When the second raven came, it carried north words that smelled like salt and ambition. When the third, it carried fear that had walked too far to be sent back by any messenger. When the fourth, it brought none at all and the bird was tired beyond prudence. Jon fed it and let it rest and then sent it out again because that is what one did with tired birds and tired men and tired hopes. He watched it go and practiced not watching it fall. At dusk, Sansa came to him with a question about bread and horses and grain secrets she had learned from women who had spent their lives making things last where weather had other ideas. He listened as if listening could be as much a weapon as a sword. When she finished, she looked at him for a long time and then said, "Do you think Father would recognize us?" "No," Jon said. "Good," she said. "Then we have a chance."